I do think we need to understand how humans work, what makes humans tick, what makes them get up every morning, face the day, how the challenges that interacting with other people pose to them. We need to understand that. So that's why I'm going to take psychology courses and encourage my students to take psychology courses to better understand humans, because we can't build socially embedded AI technologies without understanding humans. I was actually born and raised in Ukraine, in Kyiv, in the capital city of Kyiv, and most of my life, actually, nobody knew about Ukraine. So when people would ask me where I'm from, I'd say I'm from Russia because I'm a Russian speaker. As of lately, everybody has heard of Ukraine. I left Kyiv more than 40 years ago at the age of 12, and so I was mostly educated in this country. Well, we were considered refugees, but nothing like what's going on right now. My family is Jewish. I'm part Jewish, part Ukrainian. And back in the 70s, in the late 70s, there was an agreement between the U.S. and Russia to allow Jews to leave the country. And so my family ended up settling in New York City, where I went to high school and received the rest of my education there. The topics I've been studying most recently in the last year or so, actually inspired very much by the COVID pandemic, has been actually about polarization online, has been about misinformation, and it's been really fascinating to observe now in the context of a war, evolving wars, seeing wars through social media lens has been really fascinating to me. This country has been polarized completely, but it's been amazing to see how quickly the Ukraine crisis has brought people together. Nothing like a human tragedy to really bring out the best in people. I mean, all the people who were a few months ago were completely polarized and disagreeing with each other and everything. I'm talking about the political parties within this country, the Democrats and the Republicans, the liberals and conservatives. They all came together very quickly to support Ukraine, which has been wonderful to see. What's been also really fascinating to me, not only seeing in real-time evolving situation, people able to comment on what's developments there. So I'm following experts who are able to say what the movement of troops means, and then I see it discussed in newspapers. You can see in real time people's eyewitness accounts that are then combined by many sources to verify their authenticity, which also been great to see because truth is one of the first casualties in the war. And it's also been really, really fascinating to listen to the reports about how Russians are perceiving it, how their total information blackout has created this alternate reality where the Russians actually don't really understand what's going on and don't know what's going on, but they've been shaped, their opinions about it, their beliefs have been shaped by the government. And it's been really fascinating to occasionally get the Russians who are commenting on the posts in online, on Twitter, for example. And it's just painful, also hard to see how distorted their view of reality is. So, but hopefully, because there's so much data coming in, so many pictures, videos, satellite images that have been cross-checked with images from the ground, from the eyewitness, iPhone videos, hopefully the weight of truth will displace all the misinformation that is circulating and propaganda that's circulating right now. We collect data from social media to try to understand the opinions and how kind of get the temperature of the population, because what opinions and beliefs people have shapes what kind of manipulation, how their beliefs can be manipulated. So it was really we are developing tools to automatically measure people's attitudes, how their stances towards topic, whether they're pro-Ukraine or pro-Russia. We are developing tools to understand people's emotions and their moral reactions. So we are actually, it's a lot of data that right now we're dealing with, so I don't have results yet, but we can actually run this. We are running right now the text messages that people are sharing online to try to understand what emotions are being triggered, what emotions, and moral reactions that people have. Because, like I said, those are actually create the fertile grounds for others to manipulate their beliefs and their stances towards the topics. But like I said, in the past, in COVID, so the work we've done understanding reactions people have to the COVID pandemic, we see a lot of political polarization along ideological lines. How people, their stances towards the disease or their mitigation strategies, how their stances are shaped by the ideology, and as well as emotions. But right now we're not, once the Ukraine war started, the polarization for the most part had actually disappeared. We're still going to try to understand how Russians are trying to manipulate people's attitudes towards the war, even within our country. I know they have full and total control of what information the people in Russia see, but they've lost a lot of the control due to Twitter and other social media companies banning Russian news outlets. They've lost a lot of their ability to manipulate information in this country, but they're still trying. So we want to kind of understand what are the early signals, what are the early indicators of them trying to manipulate and develop also some defensive capabilities. What do we need to do? What kind of counter messaging we need to do to try to counteract some of the propaganda that they're using. And not just Russians, any kind of adversary might have different goals for manipulating opinions in this country. I've only discovered moral foundations theory a few years ago, very recently. But moreover, I've been really excited about the possibility that we can actually measure moral foundations from people's speech, from their text. So moral foundation theory basically says that humans have evolved to have certain reactions to social dilemmas. So how we act in society has been determined by evolution, years of evolution. For example, we are programmed by evolution. Our brains are programmed by evolution to react to helpless babies, for example, or people who are helpless, to react in a caring way for them. So this is like the moral foundation describe the intuitive ethics of us dealing with other human beings. So because, for example, babies are helpless, we've been programmed to care for them. So one of the important moral foundations is caring. We don't want to create harm, which is the vice of these moral foundations. We want to care for helpless individuals. So care harm is one kind of foundation or dimension of morality. Another one, actually, we evolved over time to care about cheating and fairness. So fairness is another foundation, moral foundation. So we promote fairness and we punish cheaters. For example, another one actually is sanctity and the respect for human life and for higher ideals, and versus degradation actually is a third moral foundation. There's like 5 or 6 that people have identified. And you can actually see it right now in reactions to the Ukraine-Russia war. So Russia did something that's morally outrageous, morally wrong. They invaded country, they're doing all those atrocities, and the rest of the world is actually reacting with outrage and they're shunning. So this is going back throughout histories. The way we treat people who have morally transgressed is actually we ostracize them and shun them. So they violated the sanctity, degradation, moral dimension of sanctity, and their punishment for that is being shunned from society. They're unclean, they're dirty, any social contacts with them are going to be cut. This is the way, for example, somebody who is infected with a disease like COVID pandemic, they're being separated, distanced as a way to deal with infection. And so what morally bad behavior is also kind of like infection, so they're kind of diseased. So Russia as a whole right now is diseased, and the rest of the world is doing sanctions and other to distance themselves from this morally outrageous conduct. So these types of dimensions actually govern how we describe how we interact with others. And for example, different cultures and different ideologies, they differ. They still describe it the same dimensions, but they differ in how much emphasis they play on each moral foundations. For example, liberals stress fairness and care foundations, and conservatives stress sanctity, which religions fall under sanctity, and authority foundations. Once you kind of see the world kind of break down human reactions, social interactions within these moral foundations, you can actually observe patterns. You can predict how people will react to new situations. For example, how people reacted to COVID, whether they're liberal or conservative, their ideology and the value they place on different moral foundations determined how their behaviors during the pandemic were. So liberals, for example, were stressing care, so they were emphasizing non-pharmaceutical interventions like social distancing and lockdowns, while conservatives were putting more emphasis on like individual autonomy, and so they're saying, okay, we don't want to mandates are wrong, we should be choosing our actions, our defenses. So, and we can actually, so we're trying to see if we can actually measure this type of trends and relationships by looking at people's, texts they produce, how they describe their everyday life, and trying to measure what moral foundations and emotions, as well as their attitudes towards different topics through things like social media text. Yeah. We have several data sets that we have collected. For example, we have a large data set related to COVID discussions, so from Twitter. It's about 2 billion tweets from around the world that people had mentioned topics that are related to coronavirus topics. So we just recently, my colleague Emily Ferraro released another large data set that contains online conversations about the Ukraine-Russia crisis. So our first step is to somehow collect the tweets, the discussions that people are having. And then we developed methods to analyze those discussions, to infer moral foundations or the emotional reactions that people are having, and then see how those change over time, or how, for example, when the event happens, for example, the first death in the United States, how people reacted to that, or then when the lockdowns were announced, how did people react to that, and in general, a lot of, especially with COVID, and I'm sure it applies to others as well, like the messaging is important, how you explain the necessity for non-pharmaceutical intervention, how you explain the necessity for vaccination or for masking, affects a lot of how people receive it and their actions for it. So it's interesting to, we want to understand different segments of population and how they had responded to the COVID pandemic, or how they responded to Ukraine war, and so as to be able to better shape the messages and maybe even better predict their behavior. We studied the two main sources of echo chambers. First of all, in platforms like Facebook and Twitter, people can select what information sources they follow, where they get the information from, who they get their information from. So, for example, you create friends on Facebook, or you follow somebody on Twitter, or you like certain pages on Facebook that defines what information you see, what you're exposed to. So people generally like to connect to other sources that provide views, information that's congruent with their beliefs, that is aligned with their beliefs. People don't like to be surprised or upset, so they follow sources that agree with them. So that's one. So social networks, so these connections create social networks, and the social networks, you can think of them as being kind of bubbles that people see. So that's one important source of echo chambers. But on top of that, the platforms themselves try to filter information out, try to make everybody's experience online more interesting, more relevant to them. So then pages and people produce a lot of information. So platforms filter most of that information out to present only what they think people will like, what the algorithms think people will like. And of course, what people like is usually what agrees with their beliefs, prior beliefs already. So you can imagine that this creates a feedback effect, that people already filter a lot of information by following certain points, and then platforms on top of that filter more information further to show people what they think they're like. And so because of that, people only see one-sided type of what usually they only see points of view that agree with their own prior beliefs. Yes, it's not a recipe for a very healthy society. Our society, like the effective polarization that our society is going through, like how we view people who disagree with us, not only as as people who disagree with us, we view them as our mortal enemies. That's a big part of the problem. And misinformation and yes, messaging, especially the messaging through our media and through our social media, plays a big part in creating this kind of toxic, polarized environment. How does misinformation spread? Well, it wouldn't spread if it didn't appeal to some people. So in every bit of misinformation, there is an element of grain of truth, or grain of something that people recognize and they like and agrees with them. That's why they endorse it. That's why they spread it. So misinformation wouldn't spread if it was truly false, or if it had nothing to do with reality. The fact that it's spreading means that people are eager to accept it. It's so wrapped up with the people's psychology and how their belief in who they are. Maybe there's no way to counter it. You cannot eliminate all of misinformation. Propaganda has been with us ever since media came about. Propaganda has been around with us. The question is, how are we going to, how do we tell people what's real? How do we agree on the common reality? And after having some conversations with people from different ideological backgrounds, I'm a little pessimistic that we can actually have common reality. We'll have to live with this bubbles of, echo chambers that are interacting echo chambers, probably our best solution. For any technological problem, I think there's a technological solution. But this goes beyond technology. This affects, humans' psyche and psychology. In fact, actually, I want to get like another degree in psychology, because I think in order to build technology that supports humans, people who build this technology need to better understand humans. And right now, computer science education does not include too many human elements. That's why Fred and I, Professor Morsad and I, we've actually created AI fairness class to teach data scientists at USC, students in data science program, to teach them about the human elements of the algorithms, the fact that algorithms can actually harm as well as benefit society. And you need to understand how algorithms come to harm. So in order to deal with these challenges of misinformation, of polarization, and media and technology do contribute to these challenges. Some research has been done on this, but there's a catchphrase that lies travel faster than truth. That misinformation spreads more easily and more readily than factual information. And some researchers have actually shown that also seems to be the case online. But that's not enough. I don't think it's enough to tell people the truth. You have to get people to believe the truth. Somehow lies are more easily believed often. And why? Because they probably appeal to some sort of human need that people have to believe in something. So if we can just frame truth in the same way, if we make the truth as relevant to people, as appealing to them, then it will also spread really quickly. But we need to understand, understand people better. Two things. So first of all, I do like I was talking about social networks before, and I think we can leverage the power of social networks to amplify truth and amplify pro-social behaviors rather than antisocial behaviors. And similarly for the platforms. The platforms right now have contributed to so much of this corrosive polarization and corrosive dynamics because of the values of the platforms are misaligned with social values. So we can actually, the platforms technology, the algorithms, we can actually make them more beneficial, more pro-social, if we just, change the platforms, align them better with human interests. So for example, why did polarization increase so much? Well, because Facebook was valuing interactions, valuing people who are coming back, engaging with the platform, right? What makes people engage? Well, being outraged. Outrage makes people come and read more and click more, and doom scrolling, and, for example, is a very common reaction. When things are bad, people want to feel, they actually react more to things that engender very strong negative reactions. Another thing I remember years and years ago, back in just when social media started, maybe 2010, 2009, I was at a conference, and some researcher who actually worked at Twitter, he said, one of the problems we want to solve with Twitter is actually we want to make our platform more addictive because we want people to come back for more. now thinking back to this, it's like this was a wrong goal, like something, bright minds whose whole goal was to make their platform, the technology, addictive, to make people use it, come back to it, use it more, get that exclusion of other social interactions. I could have told you even back then that's not going to lead to anything good. The values were misaligned. It was to the benefit of the platforms to make people basically be like a rat, running around in their wheel, and never go out and explore the world, because it made them rich, it gave them more advertising money, but it didn't benefit the humans, right? So the people. So this type of value misalignment will lead to things like outrage. The more outrageous the post is, more outrageous creates, the more anger it creates, the better, the more the platforms elevate this post to make everybody see it. And these types of so we can change that. We can also, the platforms can change that, hopefully, but also understand the kind of the mechanisms for what elicits. I want to understand the mechanism, what makes people. How can we figure out what values people have, and can we tailor content more to fit with their values rather than just with the engagement. These technology companies have had insatiable appetite for computer science degrees, for computer science students. We train students in how to use deep neural networks, how to use language analysis, how to do network analysis, and we send them to these platforms. What these platforms, these technology companies can do to further human development is actually to hire more social scientists, to hire more psychologists, to hire more anthropologists, and even social workers who understand human beings, who understand what makes people tick, and infuse that knowledge about people into the platforms, into the algorithms they're creating. And of course, I firmly believe that too, so I'm trying to introduce more of psychology and sociology into my own research and educate myself about humans, because in order to create better technology that's more aligned with our values, we need to understand what our values are and to be mindful of those. There's no doubt that AI technologies, like AI, the algorithms need to understand people better. But how can algorithms understand people better if the people who design those algorithms don't understand people? So that's why I'm trying to teach my students introduce more of the human element into their research, to introduce psychology, anthropology, and all the sciences. AI needs to understand, technology needs to understand to understand human values, to understand human reactions, and even to go deeper, to understand basically moods and emotions and our fundamental human experience. And how is that going to be done? Well, usually it's done. People just collect data about human experience. I mean, we need to move beyond the traditional machine learning models where you just think we have enough annotated data where people have told the computer about their experience, and then the computers will learn from that. Actually, we need to move beyond that and to understand that people do have different values, like experience is very subjective. So the big question right now that I'm starting to answer, how do we learn from subjective experience that might actually be different for everybody? I don't even know what the right solution is for that, because, like I said, people might have different values. There's something that binds us, that is common. Our humanity is commonly shared, our values are commonly shared, but we might actually differ from this. So how do we learn these differences, and how do we respond appropriately to those differences in a totally automated manner? Those are really good questions that nobody has answers to right now. But I think in order to move to building technologies that facilitates and promotes human experience, we need to answer them and start looking for solutions in this area. My very first job in Los Angeles was at a small startup company that was doing meta search, web search. It was back in 95, 96, when the web was still brand new and very exciting. So I was working for this search company, which happened to be like 2 blocks away from ISI. So when I went to my interview, I just walked, from my one company to another. But the person who I was working with had social connections, went to school with people at ISI who were looking for. So it was purely by luck, purely by chance, but that I end up at ISI. But why I stayed is because I love what I do, and it really gave me an opportunity to pursue my interests, to think what interests me, what excites me, what impact I want to create, and I have an opportunity to do it. So, for example, I was trained as a physicist. My PhD, my degree is in physics. But as a physicist, I was studying complex behaviors. I was studying pattern formation in fluid mixtures and seeing the rules that the global patterns that emerge when you heat the water from below and starts convecting and organize itself into these wonderful patterns that are moving around. So I studied that. And when I became a computer scientist, I actually started studying people, because this collective behavior that emerges from interactions, they're originally I was visualizing people as these little particles that just interact, and then collective behavior emerges. Of course, people are much more complex, and now gaining have now a lot of appreciation for the depth and complexity of individual differences of people. But this thing that excited me back in graduate school is still the same, the collective emergent behaviors of large-scale systems. Right now it happened to be human systems. And luckily I was really fortunate that I kind of became a researcher at the same time that social media was born, so which suddenly all this data about humans was available to study. So, and it's been really fun. Last 15 years have been really fun. I remember back in 2011, during Arab Spring, everybody was actually watching real time, seeing people protesting and say, okay, things will never be the same. Things are different, fundamentally different, because this kind of openness, ability to share information will be different. This time will be different, people said. New media came out, fundamentally changed human experience. And unfortunately, we've not witnessed the kind of openness was congruent or supportive of the liberal world order, where the more freedom, more democracy for people of the world. Unfortunately, we haven't seen things going in this direction. So it's really hard to make predictions. Back in 2011, during the Arab Spring, I would have said, yes, the world is on a trajectory to become more liberal, more open, more free, better conditions for everybody. Things didn't turn out that way. So I will not make predictions right now. But it is fascinating to watch in real time, be able to real time receive information from any corner of the world. But at the same time, for example, it highlights the power of information operations, of misinformation, of propaganda to shape world events. The fact that we're coming back to Ukraine-Russia crisis. The fact that Russians are not going to protest in mass what's going on is a consequence of the worldview that's been shaped by their media, by their propaganda. It's been so, I remember living in the Soviet regime, how the totality of what we know was circumscribed by the media, with the 2 channels and the few Pravda and newspapers we received. And we didn't know anything outside of that. Things filtered through some informal social networks, but that was now. Even despite whoever controls the means of communication controls the world. We are seeing that happen. So my prediction for the future, we need to come up with technologies that do not allow people to control means of communication. Whether it's the platforms or the government, we have to be really careful about this, where power resides. And right now, power is about communication, about information, and how it spreads to society.